Why does Japan seem so much sportier compared to China or South Korea? And you probably noticed this before. Anime filled with training arcs, public parks full of people doing morning calisthenics, and a nationwide obsession with high school baseball. Meanwhile, China and Korea, despite their Olympic medals, don't seem to have the same grassroots culture around everyday physical activity. In baseball, Japan has crushed the World Baseball Classics, beating both Korea and the United States in 2023 to take their third championship. In soccer, Japan has won more AFC Asian Cups than any other nation, 4 times knocking out Korea and China along the way. And in boxing, Japan reigns supreme in Asia, with champions like Naoya Inoue. But this isn't just about modern habits or global media, it's about history, from Meiji modernization to Maoist reforms. The reason Japan appears more sporty goes back centuries. In this video, we're going to explore how tradition, educational system, and national identity shape the very different relationship with sports Japan has compared to China or South Korea. Let's go back to pre-modern era. In feudal Japan, the ruling class were samurai warriors, trading swords, archery, and even horseback. To be a samurai wasn't just a fight. It was a way of life. Training your body was as essential as training your mind. The concept of Bushido, the way of the warrior, emphasizes discipline, endurance, and loyalty. And martial art wasn't just a survival tool, they were a moral system. Even during peacetime, the samurai class preserved these physical disciplines. And over time, they evolved into martial art, practiced not for war, but for personal growth. You can think about judo, kendo, karate, all descendants of this warrior tradition. Now, you want to contrast this with China. In imperial China, the ruling class wasn't warriors, they were scholars. And under Confucianism, the highest social goal was to pass the civil service exam and become a bureaucrat. Physical labor and military roles were seen as lower status. In fact, there's a famous saying in China that says good iron isn't used to make nails, and good men don't become soldiers. And in Korea during certain dynasties, this was the same. The elite class focused on knowledge and not really their physical achievements. And martial art wasn't really integrated into elite education the same way Japanese martial arts were. In short, Japan's elite trained their bodies, and in South Korea as well as China, the elite trained their minds. And if you fast forward to the 19th century, the Meiji Restoration in Japan starting in 1868 was a national overhaul. The government wanted to catch up with the West, and this also included physical strength. Western-style sports, gymnastics, and drills were imported into the educational system, military, and even workplace. Baseball came from the United States and it became huge. Track and field, swimming, soccer all gained popularity during school. And by the 1890s, Japan had sport clubs in elite universities as well as schools. And by the 1900s, martial art were back in the classrooms, not as a violent tradition, but as a structured character-building activity. China and South Korea, on the other hand, had a very different experience. And China during the late Qing era was falling apart. Foreign invasions, rebellions, and internal chaos meant modernization came too late and too slowly. Western sports entered Chinese treaty ports like Shanghai, but they didn't spread widely. After 1949, under the communist government, sports became a tool of national strength, but they were state-driven and not grassroots. Korea, under the Japanese colonial rule from 1910 to 1945, sports were introduced during this time, but they were used to promote imperial loyalty and not Korean identity. And after liberation, South Korea focused on rebuilding and education, and not sports. And sports in Korea wouldn't be a major national focus until decades later. And I think it's also important to take a deep dive into education as well as the military. In Japan, physical education became the standard in schools by the early 20th century. After-school sport clubs became the norm. To this date, most Japanese students join a club: baseball, judo, volleyball, swimming, you name it. They practice every day, often under strict discipline, to form a tight-knit team. And there's even annual sport festivals where students compete in events like relay tug-of-war, with parents cheering in the stands. This makes physical activity a normal, even celebrated part of high school years. In China, school sports were introduced more top-down. After 1949, the government launched group calisthenics, morning exercises, and standardized fitness tests. But much of the focus was on elite talent, identifying future Olympians, and not to make everyday kids sporty. Even today, many young athletes are siphoned into sport academies, separating them from typical students. Korea followed a similar pattern. PE classes exist, but the pressure of university entrance exams often mean less time for sports. Especially in high school, only those on athletic scholarships or elite tracks typically pursue sports seriously. The rest, they're usually stuck in cram schools. And in the military, Japan used physical training and martial art to strengthen its youth during militaristic periods. And the Chinese army also emphasized group drills and endurance. And Korea had mandatory service for men, which built fitness but mainly for duty and not for play. So what about public culture? In Japan, sports are interwoven into everyday life. Morning calisthenics at companies, community baseball leagues, adult martial art dojos, all are really common. Even retirement age Japanese join walking clubs as well as swim clubs. And in pop culture, sports are huge. Think about the many animes that show some sort of sports: tennis, soccer, basketball. And many of these series become some of the top shows in Japan. And while China has martial arts cinema, Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, Jet Li, outside of kung fu films, mainstream Chinese pop culture doesn't seem to push casual sports as hard. Yes, basketball is widely popular, especially thanks to Yao Ming, but there's less of an emphasis on everyday fitness in schools and media. And South Korea is different as well. It has sport heroes, like archers, esport pros, and soccer stars. But culturally speaking, the big push has been on looks as well as academics. K-pop idols spend hours in dance practice and gyms, but that's more about appearance rather than athletics. And hiking is hugely popular across all generations, but youth sports, not as much. And another reason Japan feels more sporty is because it didn't just stop at schools as well as amateur sports. Instead, it built professional leagues. In 1993, Japan launched its J-League, its first fully professional soccer league. At the time, Japan had little tradition in pro football, but the government, media, and private companies collaborated to promote the league in a way that energized communities. And each J-League team was required to have a home city and actively engage with local fans, creating a regional loyalty and a family-friendly atmosphere. Within a decade, soccer was one of the most popular watched sports in Japan, and the national team started qualifying for the World Cups consistently, hosting the 2002 World Cup alongside South Korea, which only boosted momentum. And then came basketball. For years, Japan's pro basketball scene was fragmented and underfunded. But in 2016, the country unified its league under one umbrella, the B-League. And again, this model focused on community-first sports. Smaller cities got a team, fans got involved, and basketball grew beyond Tokyo as well as Osaka. And the B-League has helped develop players like Yuta Watanabe, who eventually ended up in the NBA, and brought top talents into Japanese gyms. And then there's tennis. In the 1990s, Japan's government and private sectors began investing into training centers. This also included scholarship programs to compete globally, which was part of their long-term plan. And this eventually paid off with stars making it into the top 100 in the world. And now tennis courts are common in public parks and school facilities, and young players grow up seeing global role models. Together, these moves show something unique about Japan. It doesn't just celebrate sports from a distance. It builds a system to make it part of daily life. From grassroots to global stages, from youth clubs to pro leagues, Japan made sure that sports wasn't just watched. And let's not forget that all three of these countries dominate when it comes to the Olympics. China, Japan, and South Korea win consistently when it comes to medals. But how they got there also matters. China's system is elite-focused. The government scouts young elite athletes, train them in in-state facilities, and pour funding into Olympic sports. But the average kids often discouraged from wasting time on sports instead of academics. And the result is China gets medals, but it doesn't have a deeply sporty culture. South Korea is also similar. The government invests heavily into Olympic training and takes a huge national pride in gold medals, especially in archery as well as taekwondo. But again, there's a huge gap in elite athletes versus everyday students, many of whom give up sports to study. And as you can see here, Japan is different. Its sports success comes from a wider base. School sports club feed into national teams, the average person grows up playing sports, and many keep going into adulthood. And that's why events like the high school baseball championship fill stadiums with cheering fans. And we can also see this with the numbers. In Japan, over 65% of students participate in regular sports. Around 50% of adults exercise at least once a week, and Japan ranks near the top globally for youth physical activity. But in South Korea, the story is different. About 60% of adults report regular exercise, and youth participation is lower due to academic pressure. And the same can be said about China. Youth activity rates have been ranked among the lowest globally. Thanks to government efforts, 50% of adults are now doing some sort of physical activity. And it's important to mention here that based on the data, China and South Korea simply exercises, while Japan plays sports. So while participation is rising across East Asia, Japan's long-standing integration of sport into everyday life stands out. And this national investment into sports, it hasn't just made Japan active, it's made them world-class. If you start with baseball, Japan has dominated the World Baseball Classics, winning the championship in 2006, 2009, and most recently in 2023. And with global superstars like Shohei Ohtani, they're really leading the charge. And Japanese baseball players not only do well in Japan, but globally. And the same can be said about soccer. The Japanese men's team as well as women's team have both made headlines. The women's team have won the FIFA World Cup back in 2011, a historic first. And the men's team have now qualified for 7 straight World Cups, often outperforming expectation against European as well as South American giants. Their youth system and the J-League infrastructure are now being studied across Asia. Even in basketball, where Japan once lagged, momentum is growing fast, and many Japanese players are now in the NBA, and Japan even qualified for the 2023 FIBA Basketball World Cup. And the domestic B-League continues to grow rapidly both in attendance as well as talent development. And you can also add to that Olympic judo dominance, elite marathon runners, as well as rising stars in tennis, skateboarding, and climbing. You can say that these aren't just flukes, they're really the results of generations of cultural investment in physical education, sports infrastructure, as well as community engagement. So why does Japan feel more sporty? Because for centuries, Japan's ruling class believed in training the body. Because it modernized early and used sports as a national tool. And because schools have made sports mandatory and clubs made it a lifestyle. And because media celebrates physical discipline and not just performance. And as you can see, China as well as South Korea took a completely different path. They prioritize scholars over soldiers, they face war as well as internal struggle, making sports a luxury. And only recently have they both been catching up, both in policy as well as public culture. And even now, Japan remains unique. A country where samurai philosophy meets school baseball, where martial art are both spiritual as well as physical, and where sports are more than just a game. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, I hope you guys enjoyed. And for more videos like this, make sure to subscribe. And again, I'll see you guys again next time.
I've spent 6 years preparing for this. And this incredible moment to finish it off as Shohei Ohtani strikes out Mike Trout and Japan beats the United States 3-2 in the championship game. A classic in every sense.